So many doctors were taught in school that if patients have real pain, and by that typically means pain related to some lesion in the body that you could palpate or see on an x-ray, that if they have real pain of that type, then they could take a potentially abusable drug and the risk of abuse and addiction is minimal to nil. That's completely incorrect.
Even my fellowship director was so bold as to say pain soaks up the euphoria and therefore you can't become addicted to opioids. That wasn't what I was seeing in my own practice.
If patients have legitimate pain, we were taught that they don't become addicted to these medicines, and that instead of allowing people to suffer needlessly, we should be much more liberal in our prescribing of opioids.
There's no question that our best, strongest pain medicines are the opioids, but these are the same drugs that have a reputation for causing addiction and other terrible things. Now, in fact, the rate of addiction amongst pain patients who are treated by doctors is much less than 1%. They don't wear out, they go on working, they do not have serious medical side effects. And so these drugs, which I repeat are our best, strongest pain medications, should be used much more than they are for patients in pain.
If you look at marketing pieces where that statement is made, less than 1% will become addicted, you'll often see the Porter and Jick study and a couple of other similar quality studies used as a reference, but one has nothing to do with the other. It was a gross misinterpretation, not just by the manufacturer, by the way, but by the so-called thought leaders who were in positions of eminence in some of our professional organizations and in the pain management community, who allowed that myth to perpetuate itself by misinterpretation of those data.
I gave so many lectures to primary care audiences in which the Porter and Jick article was just one piece of data that I would then cite, and I would cite 6, 7, maybe 10 different avenues of thought or avenues of evidence, none of which represented real evidence. And yet what I was trying to do was to create a narrative so that the primary care audience would look at this information in toto and feel more comfortable about opioids in a way they hadn't before. In essence, this was education to destigmatize. And because the primary goal was to destigmatize, we often left evidence behind.
And I heard about an increased number of deaths from opiates, now exceeding, with prescription opiates, deaths from heroin and cocaine combined. I heard from our Birth Defects Center about more babies being born at risk for congenital heart defects because their mothers had been taking prescription opiates. I learned about more falls among the elderly who were taking prescription opiates, about more drugged driving crashes. And just about the only mortality statistic getting worse is the increase in death from prescription opiate abuse. This is a major public health problem, and it's getting worse and getting worse rapidly.
Clearly, if I had an inkling of what I know now then, I wouldn't have spoken in the way that I spoke. It was clearly the wrong thing to do. And to the extent that some of the adverse outcomes now are as bad as they have become in terms of endemic occurrences of addiction and unintentional overdose deaths, it's quite scary to think about how the growth in that prescribing driven by people like me led in part to that occurring.